Welcome to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast, your guide to future tech trends and innovation in a language you understand. Now, over to your host, Neil Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast, and today I have a great tech story for you all, because I invited Spencer Kimball of Cockroach Labs onto the show. And for those of you who have not heard of them before, Cockroach Labs is a SQL database for building global cloud services. But this is just the beginning. The company was founded in 2015 by three ex-Googlers who left Silicon Valley for New York City due to its vibrancy in enterprise technology, culture, and proximity to venture capitalists. And like I said, this is only the beginning of their journey, so there will be no spoilers on my watch at this part of the show. But if you are interested in learning more about a company's growth and why SQL is important for today's global companies, I think you will absolutely love this one. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to New York so we can speak with Spencer Kimball of Cockroach Labs. So a massive warm welcome to the show, Spencer. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Yes, I'd be happy to, Neil. My name is Spencer Kimball. I am a co-founder and CEO of a company called Cockroach Labs, and we make a database called CockroachDB, which is open source, and it's a SQL relational database.
Now, when I researched you guys, I quickly learned how Cockroach Labs is a SQL database for building global cloud services. But then when I started to dig a little deeper, things began to get really interesting because I believe the company was founded back in 2015 by three ex-Googlers who left Silicon Valley for New York City due to its vibrancy in enterprise technology, culture, and proximity to VCs. So this sounds like an incredibly fascinating story, but I'm sure you've told it 100 times before. But can I ask you to tell it just one more time and help set the scene for our podcast today?
Yeah, I would be happy to. It's one that's near and dear to my heart. So, all three co-founders of Cockroach Labs we started within 3 months of each other at Google. And at Google for 10 years, we got to see Google's struggles with databases and their very ambitious attempts to architect and develop their own sort of cloud-native technologies for infrastructure. That included databases, included file systems. That's actually something that I and others from Cockroach Labs worked on at Google. And, that was a revelation because Google was one of the big success stories in the post-dot-com boom ecosystem. And, where I think companies came face to face with unimaginable scale, for one. Numbers of customers that started to reach into the billions, and that necessitated new technology. So it was very exciting to see those things built. During that time at Google, of course, we're solving Google's problems. I think Google had problems maybe 10 years, in some cases, earlier than the rest of the ecosystem. But it's been 10 years now. So the rest of the companies in the world, the Fortune 500, even startups coming out of the gate, are faced with some of the same challenges, but also some of the same opportunities. And that's largely because any company now has access to the public cloud. And the public cloud gives you the potential to get fairly unlimited number of resources in any one location, any one data center, but also across data centers and even across continents and across clouds. And even that is changing as companies start to bring on new technologies like database, compute, and storage and networking that actually happens at the edge, for example.
It's an amazing story, it really is. But I've got to ask, what problems do you solve for your clients and what makes Cockroach Labs unique right now here in 2018?
So, we've kind of boiled down what the value proposition is into about 6 words, which I'll break them down. But we describe what we do as ultra-resilient SQL for global business. And the first part of that, and the most important thing, and it's where most of our customers are using us in sort of the post-Oracle world, is this ultra-resilience piece. And when we say ultra, that word's kind of a strange one. It sounds like some sort of CIA program from the 1960s or something. But it does have a distinctive ring to it. And that's very intentional because the resilience that CockroachDB is offering over something like Oracle with its sort of traditional Golden Gate sort of backup active-passive or active-active architecture. What Cockroach is providing is something called consensus replication. The old-fashioned way of doing things, the way that Oracle does things, it provides what's known as asynchronous replication. The problem with asynchronous replication is that if you do have a disaster, your data from the primary might not have been replicated fully to the secondary. So you can switch over and you can lose data. Further, you can actually have both your primary, which you think is dead, but it's actually still alive and still operating, and your failed over secondary, which is also live and thinks it's the primary now, and they can kind of create different futures. And so you can have these conflicts that have to be resolved later, and this often involves the very stressful participation of application development teams that are running on the database. Cockroach, by contrast, is providing resilience that is involving 3 or more separate physical replication sites, not just 2, but 3 or more. And then every time something's written, at least 2, the majority. So if you had 5, you'd have 3 or 4 or 5 all would have to respond, but you need at least 3. When the majority have responded, then something becomes committed. And that is a crucial distinction, which means that you don't lose data, you don't have conflicts when there are failures. So really, it's like a realignment of what disaster recovery means in an organization. Cockroach is trying to turn the conversation away from disaster recovery and more to what people are now calling IT resilience. Right? So it's kind of making these kinds of what used to be utter disasters. Think of a whole data center failing because a backhoe operator cut through a fiber optic cable. That kind of disaster, which is to take a business offline, is really just a 4.5 second bump, or sort of interruption in latencies as client load rebalances to other nodes in the database cluster, which are physically separate, that are guaranteed to have the correct answer. So you avoid these postmortems, and you have this, in fact, significantly, distinctly different level of resilience that's provided by the underlying infrastructure.
Now, on behalf of everyone listening, a question I've got to ask, of course, is where did your name come from, Cockroach Labs? There's got to be a story behind that. Yeah,
in fact, it hews very closely to the description I just gave around this concept of ultra resilience. Yeah. If you think about the world's most loathed insect, if you had to give it some props in terms of fairly impressive characteristics, I think most people would argue that it can survive, right? There's that old joke about it. After World War III, the only things left of the cockroaches. It's probably true. I live in New York City, so I can attest to it. They're difficult to kill, and they replicate, right? So that's sort of the joke behind the name. And just as a little funny aside, I and my co-founder Peter have a long history of sort of darkly naming open source projects, because in the mid 90s, when we were at UC Berkeley, we wrote an open source program called the GIMP, which is the GNU image manipulation program. But that's right when Pulp Fiction came out. We thought it was fun. We were younger then, but that was one of the fairly popular open source photo editing program.
Was there any other dark projects? I'm kind of intrigued now.
No, there were a couple at Google, but nothing that was as memorably dark as Cockroach or the GIMP.
Cool. So why do you think that SQL is still important for today's global company, especially as the technology is evolving and the business landscape is changing? How is it still important? And can you just talk about why it's so important?
It is still important. In fact, I would argue that our decision to embrace SQL was a crucial one for our success. There's a couple reasons it's important. The most prosaic of those reasons is that many businesses, and in fact, the vast majority of the big businesses, the big multinationals and Fortune 500 companies, they have a big investment in SQL. And it's more, of course, than the software and the databases and the tools that they've built and continue to maintain. It's more an investment in knowledge, right, and skill sets, and internal tooling as well, which can be very crucial for keeping systems alive and rolling new systems out more quickly. So that's that knowledge base, that momentum, and in fact, the other way to look at momentum is inertia. All of that makes SQL a must-have. And a lot of these newer systems that came out in the last 10 years that people refer to as NoSQL, they put a fairly large burden on an organization like that to learn a new API, that they're not familiar with, sometimes to give up things that can make building applications easier, like transactions, for example, in order to use the new system. So there's an impedance mismatch there. The other, I'd say, fundamental reason that SQL still matters, and in fact, I think will only grow in popularity as it's experienced quite a resurgence right now, is that SQL is an incredibly elegant idea and very powerful. It's an ability to express very complicated relationships in data in such a way that you're able to tease answers out of vast amounts of information with a declarative syntax. So people that aren't necessarily programmers and really unpacking the data and doing everything by hand can write what is, it's not exactly English language by any means, but it has some of the same characteristics as if you were going to describe to someone what you wanted to do, in terms of getting to an answer. SQL kind of looks that way. It's that kind of a language. You're describing what you want, and then you put the onus on the database to go and figure out how to do that efficiently. And some databases can do it more efficiently than others, that's for sure. And it's an incredible uphill battle, and it's been an area of active research for the better part of 5 decades, actually. And it's a huge investment for a company like ours and any other company that's building a SQL database. But in the end, it is what users prefer, and I think that is actually going to accelerate as opposed to just sort of continue.
And last year, of course, Cockroach Labs hit the headlines after they announced a 27 million Series B and Enterprise tier for its reliable database. So can you tell me a little bit about that announcement, the excitement at the time, and also what it means for your business right now?
Yes, we've had the good fortune of being a darling of the venture capital community. We started off with Sequoia and Benchmark and Google Ventures in our first round. Peter Fenton, who's our who led the investment on Benchmark side, is a board member. And then we had Index Ventures with Mike Volpe. These guys have a long track record with open source infrastructure technology. And then the Series B, which was a $27 million investment, was led by Satish Damaraj from Redpoint. And it also included Google Ventures and Index and Benchmark again. So this really sort of a team of VCs looking at Cockroach, really, if you take a step back, we had to spend our first 3 years in operation building the database. This wasn't a company that was formed around an already present open source product. It's something that we built from the ground up, and that required a lot of trust. And so for a company, for that series of investors culminating in Redpoint's $27 million investment, to follow each other into, what took 3 years of R&D to build, was a very strong sign of belief in both the team, the technology, and the market that we are addressing. And if you fundamentally look at the market, it's this very, it's very large. The relational database market is, I think it's something about, depends on what you're actually tracking, but somewhere between $40 and $60 billion a year. That's how big the market is. And it's been dominated by Oracle. Oracle is probably the most loathed vendor in the world right now. And yet they have held on to a remarkably high valuation because they, first of all, have a good product. It's certainly a good product. But they also have a very Byzantine and problematic contract structure for their customers that makes it very difficult to move off of Oracle. What's interesting about Oracle when you look at their product, despite being a good product, it's very expensive. It's also never what a new company would choose to build with. Never. Nobody uses Oracle for something new that's, a new startup or, even within companies where there are greenfield projects in sort of more cloud native environment. And that's an interesting, observation in the sense that, you have to imagine that if that's the way your business looks, if you're really holding people in via contracts, you're living on borrowed time. But when, what's happening right now is that there's this just, epic platform shift underway as every company in the world is figuring out what their strategy is for using the public cloud, because the public cloud is providing an ability to acquire new resources with very little friction and very low capital expenditures. And that can supercharge your business and how quickly you can roll out new products, and very much how effectively you can compete in a marketplace. In that new world where there's a lot of re-architecting going on by these companies in order to embrace these new technologies, there's a sort of a natural decision point that each of these companies is now facing around what's going to be the new database technology, what are going to be the new infrastructure choices going into this new world. And that's fundamentally what Cockroach Labs is positioned for with CockroachDB, our database. We are, if you look at the companies that are buying us right now, in other words, the things that are coming out of the bottom of our sales funnel, these are companies that are looking at us for a post-Oracle future. So, when our VCs are, that's fundamentally the horizon that they have their sights trained on, which is, Cockroach Labs, in terms of this much better form of resilience, the fact that it horizontally scales using commodity hardware. It's very much a cloud-native database, but it has the same capabilities in terms of the SQL and the correctness that a system like Oracle has. So this is a tremendous market where the incumbent is basically doing everything they can to drive their customers away, except for, of course, these contracts that are holding them in some cases.
Now, your client list has grown this year, and you seem to have accelerated your growth in 2018. That's what the impression I've had from all the stories I've read online. And I read a great quote from which you said, enterprises are now looking for a distributed SQL database that provides the flexibility and solid performance to support global growth. And essentially, this means a cloud-neutral solution which can support on-premise cloud, hybrid cloud, and multi-cloud environments. These are the solutions that have not been available to enterprises in the past. I mean, can you tell me a little bit more about that growth and why it's so exciting?
Yes, and 2018 has been the first year that we've actually sold the database. The 3 years before that, we're concerned with building the technology, and we think that we've established a high-quality product and quite a huge barrier to entry. Fundamentally, what we've built is now ready for the prime time, even for large enterprises. A crucial aspect of Cockroach, so there's this ultra resilient model that it maintains for high availability, but there's also the fact that it's very flexible in terms of how it's deployed, and that's something that big companies and small alike are interested in, because people aren't eager to get locked into any particular cloud vendor or onto any platform. And in many cases, companies have existing resources in their own data centers and are expanding into the private or public cloud. And in other cases, while they may focus a lot of their efforts in one public cloud because that's kind of where they've gotten started, they at least want to have a multi-cloud strategy in the sense that they feel that there's an off-ramp, if there's a more economically advantageous offer in a different cloud 5 years down the road. So, in order to maintain any kind of leverage over pricing, you have to make sure that you're not so deeply sunk into the data gravity well of a proprietary system like, Amazon's Aurora database or DynamoDB, that you can't credibly tell Amazon that you'll pick up and take your business elsewhere if they can't meet you at a sort of compromise on total cloud expenditures. So, fundamentally what Cockroach is providing for these companies is a solution that is flexible enough that it can run private, you can run it on premise, you can take those clusters, you can grow them such that they actually straddle your on-premise data centers and in the public cloud. So they can expand into the public cloud. They can do a full migration in the public cloud. They can, of course, migrate back into the private cloud if that becomes, that becomes something that a company wants to do. And I think more fundamentally, if you're in one public cloud, which is, I'd say, the norm right now, you can migrate to a different public cloud. If, for example, Azure were to give you a much better deal than AWS for for some time period in the future. So that kind of flexibility, which a lot of people you can call it cloud neutral, you can call it hybrid. That is something that many companies are looking for, and it's something that Cockroach is uniquely suited in terms of its architecture, and of course the fact that it's open source to deliver.
So where do you go from here, though? I mean, what's 2019 have in store for you guys? I'm going to ask you to look into your crystal ball a little here, but what's next for you?
Well, so, I mean, on the revenue side, it's fundamentally scaling what we've already built, and we're well into that right now. I mean, we've got a host of great companies where we expect to expand usage, go from one application use case to several and then to many. And then there's a lot of companies that are just running pilots and sort of sticking their toes in the water. So we're expanding really on all fronts right now in terms of how we're making customers successful, and that's going to really accelerate in 2019. And that will be the revenue side. But fundamentally, and what I'm of course most excited about is the kinds of problems that Cockroach is already starting to solve, and I think where 2019 is going to see just a flowering of success stories, and this is the sort of second part to the equation that I outlined earlier, ultra resilient SQL for global business, and that global business part is what really excites me, because that's a challenge that is almost intractable using current technologies. And it's fundamental, and it's very easy to express, which is, what business these days, even startups that just have a simple web app or a mobile application, let's say, right out of the gate, to the biggest multinationals, you have customers in multiple countries, right? I mean, it's very easy to have customers in the United States, and then to start getting a following in the EU, maybe to have a bunch of customers show up in Brazil or in India or in Australia, right? And fundamentally, many of those customers right now, for most businesses, are at a big disadvantage, right? They get the short straw because their latency to hop all the way over to the East Coast or the West Coast of the United States, where the company's running its back end, where its monolithic database is sitting, those architectures fundamentally disadvantage huge swaths of the users and potential customers around the globe, which makes it hard to offer a global service. And there's various ways to fix that. One is just to ignore it, which is not so great. Another way is to build a different siloed service every new place you're doing business, but that's very expensive, and only the biggest companies have done it. And then there's sort of the new approach, the one that Cockroach makes possible, whereas only companies like Google or Amazon could build this kind of technology themselves. We make it possible for a startup. We make it possible for a Fortune 500, and that is to effectively leverage Cockroach's distributed architecture to put nodes anywhere there are customers, anywhere that you need to store data, and with the help of a feature called geo-partitioning, we're able to make it so that Australian users, for example, most of their data is replicated in Australia and near them. And so their experience is very good. Their latencies are very low. Their data is stored in their legal jurisdiction, which can make, for lots of different use cases, either it can help with data sovereignty regulations, or it's really, helping a customer feel more comfortable about the service they're using. Customers, for example, in the EU, their data would be stored, replicated across the EU. They wouldn't have a copy in the United States because they don't need a copy in the United States. They, fundamentally don't want a copy of it in the United States, right? And similarly in the US. And you're able to partition the data that way. But what Cockroach is doing, and the magic behind it, is it makes that whole database feel like one holistic database, one logical database. So an application that's, the application logic that's running, let's say, as microservices in the data centers in Australia, Australian users' requests are coming in there. Most of the time, those application servers are just accessing data on Cockroach nodes that are in Australia, right? Because there's a lot of data locality. But let's say that you have a use case, let's say it's a gaming platform of some sort, where there's also users in the EU. And in this platform, let's say that users can interact with other users. They can bet against them. They can give them items, things like that. You don't want to build, two different databases and two different services because it doesn't allow that, right? Cockroach, in this particular mode, while it keeps Australian users' data in Australia and the EU users in EU, if those need to interact, they can. And Cockroach makes that transparent to the application. So really what it gives you is this, if I was going to paint a flowery picture here, it creates a global data fabric, and your application logic remains very straightforward, and it just accesses database nodes that's near it, and Cockroach does the rest. So if in 95% of the time when you have high data locality, everything's super fast, in the small fraction of requests and operations in the system where one user has to connect with another user halfway across the world, your latencies will go up. But fundamentally, your applications remain very simple and the system continues to work.
Fantastic. So if we do have people listening that have discovered Cockroach Labs for the very first time today, and they're currently feeling a little bit intrigued and wanting to find out a bit more information, what's the best way of finding you guys online, and equally the best way to contact a member of your team if they've got any questions after our conversation?
We have many touch points online, and we pride ourselves in very rapid and helpful customer responses and service. There's a Twitter handle which is @CockroachDB, and that's kind of for more general stuff. We have a blog, and I highly recommend people take a look at that. There's a steady stream of content, and it ranges from kind of higher level to deeply technical. And there's an archive now that's almost 4 years old. Think about this being posted to every week. And many of the engineers contribute to it. Many non-engineers contribute to it. So it's jam-packed with information. There's a forum for support as well. But I think all of those things are very easy to find if you access CockroachLabs.com on the web.
Excellent. Well, I'll have all those links to the show notes so people can find you nice and easy. I mean, I love everything that you're doing. I love how you're creating solutions that have not even been available to enterprises in the past and paving that way to a new, brave digital world. It's fantastic. But more than anything, just a big thank you for coming on and sharing that story with me today. Thanks.
Neil, it was my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I love the tech and how they've created something for businesses that never actually existed before. But more than anything, I love the story behind the company. And once again, how stories and experiences shape our destiny. And there was another great point raised today, and that was the point that companies such as Oracle, these big tech behemoths, are almost shackling their customers into services and long contracts and making it difficult to move away from their platforms. But they're really going to struggle in the future. Because it seems like an incredibly short-sighted approach. Yes, they're preventing companies from leaving them, but I almost want to walk into the boardroom in my Converse and blockchain t-shirt and say, you're not winning any new customers, man. Because these young, agile, fast-moving startups that are making big waves by going toe-to-toe with these sluggish behemoths are actually now coming out on top. And how many of these new solutions are actually moving over to Oracle or starting out life on Oracle? Now, after nearly 700 interviews on here, I know that it's certainly not many. Because they're priced out of the game, and this could be their downfall. But this is just me giving my opinion from the middle of the UK. In your experience, where you listen to this podcast, wherever it is in the world, is this the case? If it's not, feel free to shoot me down and offer a different side of the story, because that's what this podcast is about. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. So email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com, tweet me @NeilCHughes, or pop by my website, techblogwriter.co.uk/podcasts, hit the record button and leave me a virtual voicemail. Try and keep it nice, though, especially if you're an Oracle employee. But I hope you enjoyed today's conversation as much as I did. I think there was a lot of food for thought there. And I hope you'll join me again tomorrow. But until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thanks for listening to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast. Until next time, remember, technology is best when it brings people together.